So Lauren, I leave it in your hands whenever you're ready to begin. We still have a few more people, probably a good 10 people to drop in, and I'll just stay watching the inbox to make sure that the people do get in. But everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Lauren Thomas, and she's from Fraser Health, and she is, I don't know exactly her role, but she's one of the lead educators in advanced care planning in our Fraser Health community. Thanks for being with us today, Lauren.
Thanks, Trisha. Like Trisha said, my name's Lauren Thomas. I'm one of the nurses on the advanced care planning team in Fraser Health. And today I'm joined with my colleague, Laura Gaspard. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Gaspard, and I'm a social worker. So I make up the other 50% of the Fraser South Advanced Care Planning team, along with Lauren.
We're so lucky to have a team of 7 in Fraser Health. We are the only advanced care planning team in Canada. Some health authorities work on advanced care planning, and a lot of them are one-woman shows. So a single person out there in their health authorities implementing advanced care planning, providing education, working with the communities. So we're so lucky to have a really lovely mix of nurses and social workers on our team today, so that Laura and I can come and chat with you guys about advanced care planning. And so the point of today is to really just get sort of a basic knowledge of what it means to plan for future healthcare decisions. Because as straightforward as that sometimes can sound, it's not. And I think all of us have had experiences in the healthcare system, myself included as a patient, where things were not, how do I say very politely, ideal. So we're gonna talk about that today. And so before we sort of dive into content here, I would just like to provide a land acknowledgement. I'm not going to read what's on the screen there. You can all read, but really what I'd like to say is more of an expression of gratitude. I think the word acknowledgement is just a little bit stagnant and a little underwhelming for the expression of gratitude that I want to show for the people of the lands that I currently reside on. And for myself today, I am coming at you from the land of the Semiahmoo First Nations people. And as I look out my window today, it is bright and sunny here in South Surrey White Rock. I'm not sure if that's where you all are as well. But this weekend, I had the privilege of being able to walk at the beach and use our parks and all of these things, and I'm forever grateful for that. So thank you to the Coast Salish Nations. So we're gonna dive right in to a really silly scenario here and a really silly question that I'm gonna need you all to answer. So find your chat boxes or unmute yourself and feel free to just shout out, because we're just gonna walk through a little bit of silliness here to get us started with advanced care planning. So I want you all to sort of picture in your mind, imagine you've been shipwrecked on an island. And during COVID, that actually might sound really nice right now, but let's sort of say that it's the less than ideal situation. Okay, so we've been shipwrecked on an island. You're stranded there, alone. And you receive a message in a bottle stating that at some time in the future, we don't really know when, there's gonna be a boat that comes by. And I need you to decide right now if you want to get on. What would be your answer? Yes or no? Throw it in the chat box, unmute yourself. What's your answer?
Yes.
There's a boat coming. Yes. Well, it's a very definitive yes there. We've got yes. You know what my favorite yes is? The yes ... That's a good one. We've got lots of for sure yeses. Any no's? More yeses. Yes with conditions. Trisha's making things interesting. Yes, yes. So what are your conditions, Trisha?
Well, what's on the ship? Who's on the ship? And what's around me? Do I have what I need to survive around me quite fine? Because if so, I'll stay. Um, yeah, those kinds of things.
Excellent. There's a question about pirates I see too in the chat box. Somebody's wondering if there's pirates there. And now someone's saying, yes, that was my thought also. What are the conditions? So it sounds to me like you have some questions. And I think that's really valid, right? We're going to blindly jump on a boat or not jump on a boat without asking a few questions first, right? And so some of those things that Trisha just sort of mentioned as her conditions, you know, maybe we want to ask, what kind of island in it is it? Because if it looks like this island, and I'm going to take a wild guess here, I don't know, maybe this is Bora Bora or something. This looks like a lovely vacation to me, and I would never want to leave this island. So no, I would not be getting on a boat. But, you know, if that island was a shark infested island and I was at risk of losing a limb from this guy, Jaws, yeah, maybe I do want to get on that boat. Maybe this is not the kind of island I want to stay on. And then we ask ourselves also, what kind of boat is it? Is it this rusted, you know, dilapidated ship? Are we really going to actually get anywhere? Or are we going to get 20 feet out in the ocean and sink? Or am I going to have to row the boat myself? This is a very young, oiled up Charlton Heston there, showing all these men rowing the boat. Maybe I don't want to row the boat myself. But what if it was a luxury yacht that pulled up? You know, maybe I do want to sort of sit in the hot tub and look at the skyline and enjoy this luxury yacht. So maybe I would get on it. The other thing we need to ask ourselves is, how safe is the boat trip? You know, the Titanic, I bet all the people that got on that boat weren't expecting it to sink. So sometimes we need to ask ourselves, how safe is the boat trip? And I think one of the most important things about getting off this shipwrecked island and maybe getting on the boat or not getting on the boat is, where's that boat going to take me? Is it going to take me home? Maybe this is my lovely home. We have some other people on our team that say, actually, you know what? It looks really pretty, but I don't think I'd ever want to live there. I say, why? And they're like, that looks like a lot of house to clean, and I'm really not interested in doing that. So where is that boat going to take you? Is it going to take you to where you want to go? And so I ask again to imagine, we're going to switch to a little bit more seriousness here and forget the silliness of a shipwreck island, but imagine you or your loved one has been diagnosed with heart disease. You're in the middle of the emergency room and you've been told that your heart may stop sometime in the future, and you need to decide right now if you want attempted resuscitation. You have 5 minutes to discuss and decide. What would your answer be now?
It would depend on the prognosis that the doctor gives you.
Exactly. You have questions, right? You have questions. Right. And often, unfortunately, this is how things happen. These things are how they happen in our system, right? Quite often, we don't enter the emergency room perfectly healthy with lots of time, and somebody's going to tell us what's going to happen to our health in the future. We enter the emergency room in the middle of a crisis with a health issue already happening. And unfortunately, some of these decisions have to be made like that in those areas. And so really, the healthcare system doesn't do our communities any favors by asking these sort of binary questions. And so we would really encourage that people ask more questions in these situations to start getting at the nuts and bolts and the details of the situation, because so much of this is context dependent, meaning what is happening in that moment, what's happening with your health, who's there, where are things at in your life, what are your goals, all of these things. And so all of these lovely questions that are being posted in the chat box right now, what are my chances of survival? What will happen if I'm revived? That's an amazing question. What does life look like after you do this? You know, again, it depends on post-condition. So you can see how if we had more information, our answers might be different. And our answers might be different at various points in our lives too, given, again, context, what's happening for us, what's going on, right? And so how this, again, you know, linking this shipwreck back to our health situations. When we say, you know, asking about, well, what kind of island is it? We want to ask, what are my current problems and prognoses? What's going on with my health? What am I diagnosed with? And what does that look like in my future? What does that condition look like 5, 10 years from now? What kind of ship? What kind of treatments are being offered to me or not offered to me? Which ones are not appropriate for me? And what are those risks and those benefits? And the other issue is, you know, how safe is the trip? How safe are the treatments? Again, the last and final question really is, where's the boat going to take me? Are the treatments going to get me where I want to go? Because the answer to those questions might change our medical decisions that we might make. And so what if we did ask more questions? And what if we were more prepared or had a little bit of a plan? We're going to talk what that means about having a plan. And so this is where the concept of advanced care planning can really pull things together for people, where we can sort of have that Boy Scout mentality where we've thought about some of these things ahead of time, and we can come to a crisis, you know, not with a definitive decision, but having had conversations and having thought some of these processes through. And so advanced care planning really is about thinking about what matters to you, your values, your wishes. So that self-reflection process is really important. I think sometimes we jump ahead a little bit and say, oh, this is what I would want, without thinking about how is it that I spend my time? What's important to me? How do I live my life? Because these influence all the decisions that we make. It's really about learning about your current health conditions and how that might change over time. Also learning about the influence that the legislation has when it comes to how we make healthcare decisions. And I know that sounds like a little bit of stretch, like, Lauren, what are you talking about when you're talking about the law right now? But Laura's going to dive into that a little bit as we move through some of the content here. And of course, none of this thinking and learning and all that stuff is great, but we also need to decide on a substitute decision maker. So someone who would speak for you if you could ever not speak for yourself. And all of that stuff is lovely, but pointless if we don't share it with the people that are important to us. And then of course, sharing is lovely, but I don't know about you, but I don't have the best memory. I feel like my brain is Swiss cheese sometimes and things fall through the holes. And so we need to record some of these things, however that might look for you, whether that's writing something down, making a video, or various other things that Laura's gonna dive into a little bit later. So that's what advanced care planning is. And it really is this sort of lifelong process. It starts for us at 19 when, you know, the country says that we're an adult. So it's a process that starts at the age of healthy adult and runs right through the lifespan and all the way to the end. I think one of the myths that advanced care planning is up against and has been up against for a number of years is that planning is for planning at the end of your life or planning for the death and dying process. And those are very important pieces of our lives that we continue to need to plan for. But advanced care planning goes even further than that. And further, I mean, it's more of a proactive process that, again, is something that healthy adults should be engaging in. It doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter your health status. Advanced care planning is for everyone. And so really, when we start talking to the people that we love about values and preferences and beliefs and wishes and all these sorts of things, really these conversations are about living and actually not about dying. How do I want to live with this illness as it gets worse? How do I want to make healthcare decisions? And so you'll see as we move through the active process of advanced care planning, how that sort of really comes to light. I think we also get a little hung up on paperwork, or sort of, picking a substitute decision maker. Those things are all very important, but what's more important is that self-reflective piece around values and having those conversations with the people that are important to us. So whoever that might be for you in your life, whether that's family or friends or both, we all have circles of influence there. We know that most Canadians actually put this off. We run national surveys every year, and we know that people are thinking about all this, but we know that people aren't really interested in, we don't have that sort of, that, I don't know, are we all procrastinators at heart? I'm not really sure. But this is what we hear from the public is, we hear young people say, well, I'm not young and healthy, I don't need to do that. Well, I've got news for you. Things can change, and things can change overnight. And so there's lots of things to be planning for. And when it comes to being an adult, planning is planning. We plan for our finances. We plan for our legal matters, making wills and powers of attorney and things like that. And we should be planning for our health, because without our health, there is absolutely no use for your finances or any of those types of things. We hear people say, I've had bad experiences with the healthcare system. Now, I'm not going to do a show of hands because I know what it would look like. But even for myself, I work in the system, but I've also accessed and used the system. And I've had those bad experiences too, and those frustrations. Again, no reason to sort of put off the process of advanced care planning. I mentioned the sort of cultural issues around having these conversations and thinking that these are conversations about death and dying, which I don't want to perpetuate bad habits in our culture of not talking about death and dying, but really this is, how do I want to live? Most of us are going to get an illness that we're going to live with for quite a long time. And as we go down that journey, that road, we're going to have to be making decisions that ultimately leave us still alive and living our lives. And so there's a lot of work to be done until we get to that end of life piece. Some people delay because they say, well, my family makes decisions together. And what I've learned about advanced care planning is it feels very autonomous, a very individual process. But that's okay, we can make room for that. That's great. We love collectivism and things like that. There's space for that in advanced care planning. Other people say what will be, we'll leave it up to fate. And actually, I wouldn't not plan because of that. Actually, that's an all the more reason to plan. That's a lovely value that we should talk about and celebrate. And then other people say, I'm someone who changes their mind a lot. And that's okay too, because by no means is an advanced care plan something you do one time and lock away in a safety deposit box somewhere. It is something that is changing throughout our lives. I always write my advanced care plan in pencil because I am most certainly erasing things and changing things as my life changes. Again, that sort of analogy about our finances, it's very similar to our finances. What I was saving for at the age of 21 is very different than what I'm saving for today. And so we evolve. We are not static beings. We change all the time. And so that's okay. We can make those changes and add to it and take away. And so why advanced care plan? Well, if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that life is unpredictable. And even without COVID, I think we always knew that that was the case. Doing that little bit of planning too gives you a bit of control over what happens to you in your future, right? I think we all, especially now, that's what I've experienced during COVID too, is that we all really crave that certainty. We want to know what's going to happen. We want to set things up so that they go our way in the future. And so planning like this can give you that sense of control as your health changes. What we're going to discover today that Laura's going to fill us in on, which is usually an aha moment for a lot of people, is that if we don't make plans, there are some legislation pieces in place that would decide for you anyway. And that's there to protect you, actually, and protect all of us if we were ever patients. And so Laura's going to dissect that a little bit more. But really putting all these plans into place really is a gift to your family and friends. As a nurse at the bedside, I've sadly lost count of how many times I've been in a situation where there's a crisis, patient couldn't speak for themselves, and I'm asking the family, you know, so did you guys ever talk about this? What would he want? And they said, it never occurred to us. We never had this discussion, and now I don't know what to do. So, you know, these plans really are a gift to everyone in our lives. Now, I just want to dispel one sort of myth that really gets my goat. And so people say, well, okay, we're going to do this planning process, but what does that really mean? We're going to get into the tangible bits really quick here. But how do I make decisions right now about my future health? And the answer, quite simply, is that you don't. Advanced care planning is not about a laundry list of specific medical procedures that you do or do not want. It would be really difficult for me to sit here as a healthy adult and make a big list and check off, yeah, I probably want a feeding tube. No, I probably don't want a breathing tube. It's really impossible to make those decisions without knowing, without having, again, that health context. So what's happening to the person in that moment, because there are so many details to navigate. So we don't have this crystal ball. I can't look into the future and figure out whether I'm going to eventually have high blood pressure or, you know, have COPD or one of these things down the road. But what I do know for sure is I know who I am. We all have that moral compass. We all have those values that we live through each and every day. Everything that we do, every action, what you chose to wear today, what you chose to eat for breakfast, the partner that you chose for your life, the career or non-career that you chose, all of these things are related back to our personal values. And by sharing those points of reference with our families and friends, that can help them make decisions. So to get to the doing, how do we actually do this? We're going to talk about advanced care planning in sort of these 5 steps. And that makes it seem like it's linear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It absolutely is not. And I would encourage you to think of it more like this pie here. And just like an apple pie that you would bake or purchase, you know, you take your first slice wherever you want to take it. And I would encourage you to look at advanced care planning the same. You don't necessarily have to start at 1 and move all the way through. Maybe you want to start at 4, talk and have a conversation with your family because you've already done some reflecting. Or maybe you want to revisit the learn section and make an appointment with your doctor to get some more information on your health conditions. So again, I encourage you not to get overwhelmed by all of the steps. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And whatever little bit that you can do, again, is a gift to yourself and to your family. So we're going to dive in at step 1 here, think. And these 5 steps, you might see them sort of all over social media or on posters at the hospital or different places like that, because these 5 steps were created by our national body for advanced care planning. And so Canada really is ahead of the 8 ball in terms of really encouraging these processes and having the right people and healthcare clinicians in the right spaces to be supporting them. So these 5 steps hopefully will start to look a little bit more familiar as we do some really good marketing and our national folks get it out there. So we're going to start with think. And again, this is a reflective process like I mentioned earlier, because reflecting on your personal values really does help you make decisions related to your health care. So I'll give you an example that may seem silly to any of you, but it was very important at the time. I was looking after a patient in the cardiology unit at Surrey Memorial Hospital. She had been experiencing a lot of bouts with her heart failure, having a lot of really bad symptoms and coming to hospital. And we'd sort of tune her up and send her on her way. But this last one, she was really having some trouble with her symptoms, and her family was really concerned about her safety. And so they really wanted to discuss her living arrangement. And she wasn't sold on it. Of course, none of us would be sold on that idea. And she was really struggling to have these conversations with her family and to really know, what should I use to help myself make this decision? She had all the information about her health condition. She knew what was going on. She knew her prognosis. She knew where things were headed. And she was really struggling. And so myself and the social worker sat down with her and said, let's just get back to some basics here. Tell me what brings you joy. What gives your life meaning and purpose every day as you get up? Now, with her health condition, she couldn't get around a lot. She wasn't super mobile, wasn't able to do some of the things that she used to do for fun and things. And I said, no, what gives your life meaning and joy? And she said, well, this seems really silly. And I said, just think about it every day. What is it that you do for fun? And she said, well, I'm a bit, apprehensive to sort of share this with you, but, right now my family has a private caregiver that comes in every day. And we have tea, and she's lovely, and we get along great, and we chat every day. I said, that's wonderful. But she said, but the best part about that is that, she said she was of a certain age and she wasn't too concerned about her diet anymore. And so she said, my caregiver comes in every day and makes me bacon and eggs for breakfast. And it is the best part of my day because I get to have my bacon and eggs, my favorite breakfast, every single morning. Now, to some of us, that may seem silly or insignificant, but really what she was doing was that reflective process of sort of breaking down what is a great day? What did she do for fun? How did she like to spend her time? What was really important to her each day? And so she sort of asked, well, if I move to a different location, if I move to long-term care, am I going to have bacon and eggs every day? And I said, likely not. That's not usually how our systems work. And she said, well, then if that's the case, then I'd rather take my chances at home. So you can see how some of these simple things in life that really create joy for us are the compass that guides the decisions that we make all the time. And so if we were in the situation of before we're in the middle of the hospital, before a crisis, we give ourselves the gift of time to really think hard about our goals and values. We more often than not, we tend to make better choices. And by better choices, I mean the better choices for you. My choice wouldn't be yours and vice versa. We all have different circumstances and different values that we live around. So I think this is the hardest step, actually, the think part, because if I was just to walk up to somebody on the street and say, what are your values? I most certainly would probably get a blank stare. It's not something that we think about all the time. And so I would encourage you to sit down and make a joy list or write down how you spend your time. Sort of think back, what's important to you, right? Because again, those are at the core for how we make decisions.
All right, and
We're going to move on here.
My turn to jump in. So I'm going to cover step 2. So we're going to talk about learn. So what are we learning? And there's kind of 3 different areas or topics that we really want to explore and learn for ourselves when we're talking about advanced care planning. So the first question is, how do I like to receive information? So everyone's going to be a little bit different, but a little bit of a reflection process for ourselves. How do I like to make decisions, right? Do I like to do this independently by myself, or do I like it to involve other people from my family or from my community in this? And how much information do I like to take in as well? So I know for myself, I'm the type of person who likes all of the information I can get at once, and then I need to go home and process, and then I might talk about it with people who matter to me in my world, and then I can come up with a decision. But everybody works a little bit differently, so it's a good question to kind of reflect on and think about moving forward. I guess then you can also communicate this with your healthcare providers so that they know what information to give you, and that they can be helpful in guiding you through advanced care planning as well. The second question is, what do I need to know about my health? And you can see there's lots of different questions on the screen there, and it kind of goes back to the shipwreck example that Lauren went through, right? We had all of those different questions that came up. We want to explore, what health condition do I have? And how does that impact my life right now? And how is this going to impact me in the future? What is my health going to look like, and how is that going to make my life look in the future? What are the possible treatments and the complications with those treatments? So it goes back to, where is this treatment going to take me, right? Is this something that I want to pursue? And then what happens when the treatments are no longer helping me? So what kind of looks next in that journey when we're learning about health and that health journey long term? And then what might lead to the end of my life? So in terms of the specific health conditions you have, what might that look like? What are some of those complications that can cause issues and, again, impact your life down the road? And the third question, what do I need to know about the law? So we're going to be speaking BC specific, but thinking about what are some of those legal documents that are available to me. Do I need to go to see a lawyer for this particular document, or can I do this work on this document independently? And then also keeping in mind, in British Columbia specifically, we do have laws that dictate who can speak for us if we can't speak for ourselves, if we don't already have someone designated, if we haven't chosen someone already. So do we know who that is in our particular situation? And I will be going through some of those law pieces in a little bit here in more detail. So the primary legal documents that are in British Columbia specifically around healthcare. We've got the three documents there: the Enduring Power of Attorney, Representation Agreement, and Advance Directive. So it's good to keep in mind that all the laws across Canada are different. They're provincial and territorial legislation, and the language around them is very different. So sometimes it can get very confusing when people are using different lingo. But these are the ones specific to British Columbia. So the Enduring Power of Attorney is finances only. So it has nothing to do with healthcare. It's only those financial and legal decisions. The Representation Agreement, that's the one that's really key for healthcare and healthcare decision making if you as an individual are not able to speak or communicate for yourself. And then the Advance Directive is a document where you can write very specific instructions. So a very simple example might be maybe within your own culture, you don't believe that it's appropriate to have blood transfusions. And so you can write that down, that you do not want blood transfusions right in the advance directive. So it's a very specific, that kind of like a wish list, I guess you could say, that you can write out, and it can be directions for healthcare providers. And then we move on to step 3, and we're going to talk about decide. So this is more to do with that legal piece that I was talking about a moment earlier. So I just want to walk you guys through briefly beforehand, just a visualization. So just imagine a moment or a time where you might struggle to make your own decisions, or maybe you'll struggle to communicate just in general with someone else. You know, hopefully you haven't experienced that yet in your life, and we all hope that we don't have to go through that. But these type of scenarios, they can creep up on you slowly. So something like a dementia, or it can happen quickly overnight. Like this little guy, he's falling off a ladder. So a head injury, a car accident, something like that. So it can be very sudden. When we're talking about these scenarios in terms of how long they can last, it can last a long time where you're not able to communicate or make your own decisions for that longer period of time, or it can be very temporary. An example in my own life, I had a cousin who was 38 at the time. This was a couple years ago. He was in a fairly bad car accident, and he was in ICU, and he wasn't able to make decisions for himself for about 3 months. So not a super long time, but it still was quite a long time. And so he needed someone there who could talk to healthcare providers and help make decisions about his healthcare going forward. So keeping all of those pieces in mind, opening it up to you guys in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. If you were unable to speak for yourself and someone was going to make medical decisions on your behalf, what kind of qualities would you want that person to have, that spokesperson?
Someone that knows me and knows what the important things are in my life. My quality of life is the most important thing to me in the future. And as long as we've discussed it and they know exactly the qualities of life that I'm looking for, then I'm confident that they will represent me properly.
Yeah, exactly. And Lauren says good communicator. Someone who's not shy to speak for my values when needed. Someone who does not panic easily. That's good. Like someone who's not afraid of confrontation or is good in a stressful situation. That's a good one. A person who's able to follow through on the qualities of life that I value. Yeah, so making sure that they're following your own wishes, not what they would do for themselves, even if they've communicated or you have communicated that to them. Yes, calm in a crisis is a gift. Yes, Lauren. Understands medical lingo. Yeah. I don't know about others. Lauren might be able to attest to this, but quite often when there's someone who works in the healthcare system in the family, they usually get put into that position of being the substitute decision maker for a person, just because they happen to know the system a little bit better and what to expect. Someone will respect my decisions, and compassion. Yeah, all of those are fantastic. Now, I don't know if any of those qualities, now that we've gone through some of them, if you guys are able to picture someone within your lives that fits those descriptions. You don't have to share who that is, but what I will go through next is the substitute decision maker list that is within legislation. And we can explore where that person falls in that list, just to see if it falls okay in the event that there is an emergency for yourself. So am I
just
moving
before we move ahead,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just before we move ahead here, you know, the reason we ask you to reflect on sort of these qualities is sometimes when we skip right to the who's going to make your decisions for you, we just kind of automatically default to the person that we think is the right person, our spouse or whoever that might be. And actually, when you actually look at the question from the perspective of qualities, you know, maybe some of these really important people in our lives, maybe these qualities are not their forte. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad person, but it helps shed light on who actually might be the best person to make decisions for you. I love my spouse, but sometimes I think in a crisis, maybe my best friend is actually the better person to me making decisions. Obviously, you know, having conversations with all the people in my life before that happens. But, you know, maybe my best friend who's a nurse, who knows me really well and who's really good in a crisis is actually the better person to be my decision maker. And so I just want to put that out there with that reflection piece. Because often when Laura and I talk in the public about substitute decision makers, and we sort of let people off the hook a little bit and say, it doesn't have to be your spouse, by the way. To be honest with you, we see a lot of men in the audience go, oh, thank God. Because we know when it comes to making medical decisions, 80% of all these decision making that's happening out there is women. Women are making decisions. We are often the people that are stepping forward in these situations and helping with these things. So that was not a husband bashing comment, but just sort of a reflective piece to sort of think about who is that person, you know, that right person for me.
Yeah, it's not a love contest. It has nothing to do with that. Okay, so I'll go through this list. That is a preset order within our legislation.
And I think we should clarify too that this is a list of someone who's going to be making a medical decision. So this isn't a phone tree for the healthcare system. Healthcare providers are happy to communicate with whoever we need to communicate with to get the right information about you. This is if a treatment is being offered to you and we need your consent. We typically don't like to just do things to people. We need your permission first. And so if you're not able to give us your permission, then we need to go to the next available and the correct person.
All right. Yeah, and so first off, just kind of tying into what Lauren was saying, the first person we're always going to go to within the healthcare system is that capable adult. So if you are able to speak for yourself, to communicate for yourself, make those decisions because you're cognitively well, we're going to go to you as that capable adult first for that decision-making consent piece. Now, if it was a scenario kind of like my cousin where he was unconscious because of this car accident, he had a bit of an acquired brain injury in the moment, so then the healthcare providers would start going down that list. And so the next person on that list legally is a personal guardian. So the lingo in the legislation is a comity of person, and essentially this individual is appointed by the court as a person who takes care of all of those decision-making pieces around healthcare. And I believe they can also be designated financial powers as well as a comity, but that is determined by the court. They're the ones who determine that. We don't actually see this very often in healthcare. It is a very lengthy, expensive process. And luckily in our province, we do have a way of finding a decision maker. So we don't, a family or loved ones within the person's circle don't have to go through that expensive process. It's kind of a catch-all if there's an emergency for someone. So as I said, it doesn't happen very often, so we likely won't see a committee of person in healthcare. So if we can't find that, we move to the next on the list, which is a representative. So that's looking for that Representation Agreement Act, whether it is a Section 7 or Section 9, which are two different parts of that legislation documentation. And that's where a person has actually written and designated a person who they would like to be their spokesperson if they're not able to make decisions for themselves. And that document, you can either go to a lawyer to have completed, or you can have it completed without a lawyer with specific witnesses as well, which is all outlined in the document. If we don't have a representation agreement on hand, or we can't find it or can't access it, then we look for an advance directive. So that, as I had said before, is that directions list or written document that's a legal document. So was there anything that was specific wishes written out in this legal form for healthcare providers to follow? If we can't find that, then we move on to the temporary substitute decision maker list. So this is something that's fairly unique to British Columbia, which I think is fantastic. I've worked in Ontario and Alberta, and they don't have something like this, but this just allows healthcare providers a little bit of guidance to figure out who we should be seeking consent if we can't find any of these other documents and the person who has come to us is not able to make that decision for themselves. Again, when we're seeking consent for a specific decision. So that first person that we would go to is a spouse. So common law, same gender, doesn't matter as long as they're a spouse. The other piece to keep in mind in terms of spouse and common law under this particular piece of legislation is if you've lived with your partner for, what is it, 24 hours, Lauren? Then that person would be deemed a spouse. So I'm not sure if any of you are dating anyone right now, but if you ever do move in with a partner, then keep in mind that they might be determined as a spouse under this particular legislation 24 hours after moving in with them. Sometimes that's okay for people, sometimes that's not okay. It's usually more of a concern for the younger adults when there's a boyfriend and girlfriend or partnering and they're maybe like 20, 21 years old and they don't realize that there's all these pieces here that might be bigger responsibility than expected. Number 2 on that list, if there's no spouse or we can't get a hold of the spouse, would be adult children. And so taking note that all adult children are equally ranked. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that can get complicated. We've had families that we've worked with, Lauren and I, where there's 8, 9, 12 children and they're all equally ranked, and that can be a little bit stressful if we're not totally sure if all of them are on the same page. So good to keep in mind for your own situation. If you do have multiple children, making sure that they're on the same page, or maybe you want to have that conversation with them about who could be the spokesperson if anything were to fall on them. So just something to keep in mind. Number 3 would be a parent, equally ranked. And then we'll see, so brother or sister, siblings, equally ranked. Then we go grandparents, grandchildren, anyone else related by birth or adoption, close friend, a person immediately related by marriage. So the number 9 there is usually for the daughter-in-laws that quite often end up needing to step up or end up stepping up to help support someone who's a little bit older. And number 10 is meant to be another catch-all, another person who's appointed by the public guardian and trustee office, or maybe it is going to be the public guardian trustee office. And again, they will not do anything unless we as healthcare providers, when we go to them and say we need some support, they're going to be asking, well, is there a decision that needs to be made in this moment? Because they won't make any statement unless there is a decision that needs to be made, and healthcare providers need that consent. So the other big thing to notice here, what we find with a lot of people, and I can say for my own situation as well, is sometimes our person that we have in our mind is further on down that list than maybe we want them to be. So maybe using myself as an example, I don't have a spouse, I don't have any adult children. I do have my parents around still, but they're getting older, and so I don't necessarily want them making decisions for me if something happens to me. I do have 2 siblings, don't think they're on the same page. Not sure if I want them to speak up for me. So my number 1 is actually a friend that I'm thinking of in my head, especially when we go through all of those qualities like we did. But close friend, as you can see, is number 8 down at the bottom. So how might number 8 trump my number 3 and number 4 in my particular situation? So for me, I would need to get a representation agreement in place, because representation agreement is C, whereas all of the other people on that temporary substitute decision maker list is E. And so the only way that my friend who falls as number 8 in E is going to come ahead of 3 and 4 is if they're written in that representation agreement. Now, not everyone needs a representation agreement, but for my particular situation, that might be valuable. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Lauren?
Yeah, I like your example there. Thanks for sharing your personal situation there about how your close friend is probably the best person for you. And so if you were to make a representation agreement and name your friend as your representative, that would be lovely. I think what Laura and I have experienced in our careers, being right at the bedside, is that obviously a crisis can hit whenever, wherever. Health crisis knows no time of day, day of the week, or time of year, anything like that. And so if something were to happen to Laura and she was in hospital, and the physician went to go call her representative to get consent to take her to surgery or something like that, it's very, very possible that her representative might not answer the phone. One day after COVID is over, I hope that we all get to go on vacation again. So what if Laura's friend, her representative, is lying on a beach somewhere in Hawaii, getting a beautiful tan, and doesn't answer her phone because it's all the way back in her room? These things are really plausible. They can happen. And so it's still really important that Laura has walked through the list on her own, her temporary substitute decision maker list. And she knows that if somebody's not going to get a hold of her representative, that she knows her parents and then her siblings are next in line. So when it comes to communicating and talking about our wishes and letting our decision makers know what's important to us, not only does Laura have to have really good conversations with her close friend who she's named as her representative, but she still needs to talk to her parents. She still needs to talk to her siblings, because they could be called upon in those moments. But also, even if her representative was contacted and was involved in medical decision making, who better to surround her close friend than the other people on this list, her parent and brothers and sisters, providing her friend with the support that she needs in those moments, making those decisions, saying, yeah, we talked to Laura too, and you're doing the right thing. This is what she would have wanted. That kind of support network is really, really important. So being aware of this temporary substitute decision maker list for all of us is really, really important. And one of the other things I wanted to point out was that word temporary. That word temporary is there because we need to go back to that list every time a different treatment is offered. Because the situation could change. Laura's friend could get back from Hawaii and something else could happen to Laura. And that time we might actually get in touch with her representative. So it's temporary in that it's in the moment there. The last statement that I want to just make, and then we're going to go to these chat questions because we're going to pause here for some questions because this is a really good space to do that. But at the beginning, when Laura mentioned, you know, capable adult is at the top there. That seems really obvious to all of us. But unfortunately, Laura and I have both had experiences in the healthcare system where families or friends think that they are advocating for their loved one, and instead they end up talking over that capable adult and trying to be their voice, even though they're currently there present with us. And so I want to reinforce that always, always, always adults choose for themselves. We always go to them first. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what's in your health history or what kinds of things you might have going on. We meet adults all the time with developmental disabilities. We always go to them first. And if the situation shows us that they really are not capable of making decisions, then we move down the list. But you always come first as that person. Do you want me to read some of these questions out, Laura? I feel like this is a really good place to do that.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've just got the two. So we've got one from Helen. If my chosen rep was not available and the next in line was speaking, could my rep take over when available? So that's kind of like what Lauren was saying there, where it's temporary substitute decision maker. So it would be that one decision that's being made. So if your representative comes back, let's say from Hawaii, using the same example Lauren was giving, and there was another decision that needed to be made, then and that person is available, then they can definitely jump in and take over, because it's just that for that one temporary in the moment decision, and each decision is reassessed again to see if we can connect with anyone. Does that answer your question, Helen? Great. And then from Holly, can she talk to her MD ahead of time? Would there be a way for the system to know and communicate your basic wishes? So that's where we also encourage people to talk to all of their healthcare providers. We do have ways of communicating within the system with our documentation that we're really encouraging people to use and to access, so that that documentation is there, can be read, and then hopefully if you are capable, or if we're going to a person to be your temporary substitute decision maker, for example, then we can just clarify, hey, this is what I've read from a conversation you had with your doctor. Is this still valid? And so it's coming from a place of having a little more knowledge and not trying to start from scratch when we're trying to make decisions. And it also gives, even if those decisions those values have changed at all with the documentation, there's still a baseline. We've got a little snapshot of who that patient might be, even if things are changing for that person. Lauren, did you have anything else to add about that one? No? Okay. If personal guardian is such a long, expensive process, do you know what makes it second on the list? Lauren, you might be able to answer this better. My understanding is it's because it's court appointed. It's basically yeah, when you're talking about legislation and who has that power within the law, because it is a court, court-appointed person, that's what makes it higher up on the list. Anything else, Lauren?
Nope, that's it. Yeah, the
Okay.
committeeship is a court order by a judge, so we have to follow it. That's what makes it so high on that hierarchy.
From Holly, does the consent process take time and delay emergency treatment? No, if there's emergency treatment that needs to be done right away, then that will be acted upon right away, because we work in teams. While people are taking care of that emergency care that's needed right then in that moment, then there's other people looking to see if, is there any documentation? Is there any people who can speak otherwise? And let's say it's CPR that's being given. If all of a sudden we find a do not resuscitate form, then we say, hey, we've got this, you need to stop the CPR at this point, and then they'll take hands off.
Yeah, so this is sort of the ideal situation, is what Laura's talking about with this list, is that we have time to go down the list and obviously get consent from the right person. Obviously, we know that's not the situation. If somebody's, been hit by a car and there's blood everywhere and all these sorts of things, these laws all have emergency provisions. And that means that when a paramedic shows up and you're unconscious, it is life over limb. They're not going to ask your permission. They're not going to get your consent. They are going to do everything they can to save you in that moment. Want to go to the next question there, Tricia? From Tricia?
Tricia, so a representative would not trump a personal guardianship. So yeah, a representation agreement, because it falls lower on that list, they would not trump a personal guardianship. So that comity of person, that personal guardian is higher up in powers. If there was concerns about that person who was designated by the courts, then unfortunately, whoever has that concern needs to go through the application process and bring the whole scenario back to the court to be reevaluated.
Yeah, the whole reason a personal guardian is assigned by a judge is that the patient or the person's capability is in question, and there's some sort of dispute on who is going to be the substitute decision maker for that person. And the situations can get so messy that we sort of advise people, you know what, you need to go take this to court and duke it out in court and figure out who's going to be the guardian of this person. And so if that person's capability is being questioned, then they wouldn't have a representation agreement, because they would need to be capable in order to sign a legal document.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly, Holly, thank you.
Yeah, so Holly says comity is for people who are not able or reliable to make their own decision for a safety reason. So yeah, exactly. Any other questions before we move on? There's a lot of information that we packed all together on one slide. So, okay, so moving on. So I know the lingo that we use is substitute decision maker, but ideally what is really going on is this substitute decision maker is not actually making any decisions. They're hopefully, in best case scenario, they're just communicating what you've already expressed, or you've written down, or you've communicated with the person. And so we've titled this slide Substitute Decision Communicator, because that's really what their legal role is they must follow those wishes and things that you've expressed about how you want to live. they have a legal obligation to follow through on that. And if there is a dispute around that from the healthcare side of things, there are ways of making sure that your voice as the patient is the one that's being heard, because that's what's important and that's what the law says. So other qualifications for the substitute decision communicator is they must be 19 years of age and older, so they must be an adult. They must be willing and capable. So if we start going down that list, let's use the temporary substitute decision maker list as an example. If you're going down my list and let's say I don't have a representation agreement, they fall to one of my parents, and my parents say, no, we're not comfortable with making these decisions. Well, then we would move down the list because the person who is making that consent or communicating those decisions, they must be willing to participate in that role. Capability, this kind of reflects more to, the countless times I've worked with couples where you've got one person, they've got a lot of physical health issues, and then you've got another partner who has a cognitive impairment of some sort of dementia. And so the person who's got physical health issues, they're not able to make decisions in the moment, but then we go to their spouse, who would be number one on that list, and they wouldn't necessarily be considered capable of consenting to those treatments for the patient. So then we'd have to move down the list. There needs to be no conflict within the last 12 months. So within the last year, not having any arguments or issues within the family or the relationship there. And they must have had contact in the past 12 months as well. Now, these two pieces are a little bit vague, and I personally think it's because we don't want to necessarily define in a piece of legislation relationship dynamics, because everyone's a little bit different, but it does come up to a particular definition. For example, does a Christmas card count as contact within the last 12 months? And so that's one conversation that ends up coming up for healthcare providers, but just so you guys are aware of that. And again, as I said before, that substitute decision maker, they're legally obligated to honor a person's wishes, and they do have a fairly dynamic role. You can see with the little image on the side of the screen there. They have to take into account a lot of different components of a person's health, right? Like the condition, what are the options for treatments, including the risks and benefits of those treatments. What were your wishes as the patient, and did you leave any instructions behind? And then also going back to some of these steps that we've been going through, thinking about the values, the beliefs, any of those preferences or expressed wishes that the patient has. That's what the substitute decision maker needs to keep in mind when they are consenting or having that conversation with healthcare providers about a consent decision. So we've got a question. How do medical personnel?
I just answered it, Laura.
Okay,
so
sorry, we'll move on.
We're going to talk about that question really soon anyways.
All right, so we can move on. So yeah, just a quick note on capability. So just because we've been talking a lot about capability, and I know sometimes that can be kind of a scary concept, especially when we're talking about a capable adult, and when do we not go to that capable adult. We don't want to be in a circumstance where we lose our own voices within this bigger system. So when a healthcare provider is thinking about assessing capability in that particular moment, because again, it's moment by moment, we want to know if the patient understands the nature and consequences of the situation. And so this is a very fluid concept because even if we have issues mentally or with processing or whatever the circumstances happen to be, there might be decisions that you can understand nature and consequences of the situation, and be able to provide consent to those pieces. Whereas there might be something a little more complex and dynamic that might be more of a struggle, but we're not going to have a blanket statement saying you can't make any of these decisions. It's very specific, moment by moment. And so that's where, when we come across situations like a person who does have Alzheimer's, we do want to look at, can this person understand what's going on in the moment? And it really depends on where they are in their disease journey. And so assessing what is the consent decision that's being made, and what is this person's state of being in this moment? Do they understand this or appreciate the consequences? Kind of same with people who are living with developmental disabilities, and there's such a wide gambit of abilities for people who do fall into that category of health and wellness. Sometimes they just need a little extra support with those decision-making pieces, and we take things decision by decision. Mental health situations, I don't know, should I jump into that quickly, Lauren, or leave it?
I think we can address it if it's a specific question.
Sure. Yeah, that one involves another piece of legislation, so it's a little more complicated, but we can move on to step 4, just keeping in mind of time as well. So step 4 being talk, right? So Lauren's brought it up a couple different times, just about talking with the people who are meaningful in our lives, right? So when we're thinking about who we should be talking to, who are those people that give you strength and support? Or if you've had a good day or a bad day and you want to share some of that information with, who are those people that you go to? You want to share something that's going on with you, the first person that pops into your head, right? Those are usually the people that provide us the best support, that we feel safest with. So these are some of the people that we want to think about, and maybe include within those conversations. Talk about some of those values, maybe some of those things that we've learned about our health, and some of those reflections that we've had. These people may or may not be the person that is your legal decision maker. Ideally, you do have these conversations as well with the person who is your decision maker as well, if you're not able to speak for yourself. But being able to share this information and kind of, so to speak, spread the love. You don't want to keep this information locked up. You do want to be able to share this with as many people as possible, because as Lauren had said before, if we're going down that list because we can't find certain people, then they've got those, you've got more people that know what your wishes are and how you would make decisions for yourself in particular cases. Or they can be there to support your decision maker as well. So the friend that's come back from Hawaii and maybe they're feeling just a little bit rattled by the weight of the decision, and they provide consent, but then there's all these other people you've communicated with, these important people that you feel give you strength and support in your life, and they can support that person and encourage them and say, yeah, you know what, I've had the same conversation with Laura, and that's exactly what she would have said. You're doing okay. That's the good way to go. So there's that encouragement there. And often we hear, that these conversations are really, really tough, right? They're not easy conversations. Often there's this fear that we are talking about death and dying, because we still live in that culture that tries to avoid death and dying conversations. So we do say, you know your people best, figuring out a way to communicate that. We've heard some really creative ways that people have gone out and talked with their families. But we've got a couple different suggestions here for you. You know, suggesting that you want that support person to be prepared if they need to make decisions for you, or even just suggesting, hey, like I need some support. Can you come to my doctor's visit with me today, just to hear what's going on and involve you in that process. And just bringing up like a personal value, right? I think it's really important all of the family understand my wishes. So being able to bring it into a more collectivist space, right? So I can tell you it's, with some people it's easier than others. My mom and I are still working on my dad, trying to have that conversation with him. It is a bit easier for my mom and I to talk about these things, but then when we try to draw my dad into it, he shuts down. So we're trying to put our heads together and still figure it out. But
you need to trick him, Laura. You need to trick him into having these conversations.
Right. Why don't you share some of your
well,
your
I think sometimes these conversations are happening right under our noses, and what it is that we don't realize that maybe a family or friend is actually telling us something really, really important. We had the news on about a month ago, and we saw this guy, walking around with one of those, those big fake checks, those Ed McMahon checks, because he had just won the lottery. This guy had won $2 million. And my husband looked at it and he was just like, man, if I won $2 million. And I said, what would you do with that? And he was just like, well, once the COVID restrictions are lifted, I'm going to France. That's what I would do with the money. That would be the first thing that I would do, is get on a plane, and I want to travel, and I've always wanted to go to Europe. And so what was happening in that really short, casual interaction was he was telling me something really important about himself. He was telling me something about his values and what his future plans were and how he wanted to spend his time and with who and doing what. And so these conversations don't necessarily always have to be exactly about our health or, what's going to happen or those sorts of things. We can have different kinds of conversations that really help get at our values.
Yeah, so ultimately, and Lauren, I'm sure you can attest to this with your example there too, because of all the different things that you could spend money on, it could be a shock. Like spending that money to go to France, it might have been a surprise for you, right? So when we have these conversations, we might think that the people who matter to us, our loved ones, our family, our friends, we might think they know what we would decide. We might think that they know what matters most to us, but in the end, it might not actually be the case. And we do have a little video. I think I can quickly put it into the chat box, and you guys can watch it at your leisure. And it's a great little video, advanced care planning from Australia, I believe it is. Yes, Australia. And so they do touch on this a little bit, just how, and you kind of see the different dynamics with the people that they do talk to. So some of these people have obviously had conversations before, and some of them hadn't in the past, and just that emotional response and preparedness for when these questions were asked by the interviewer. So really, we just encourage to have some conversations, just talk it out however way you think is going to work best for your particular situation. And then we move on to step 5. This is our last step, record. So again, as I said, we don't want you to kind of lock up this information and keep it hidden from the world, kind of like sometimes we like to do with our wills, because it only comes up once we're gone. We want this information shared, right? So it's okay to have this written in different places. And the type of things that you can write down, kind of like we're talking about the values and things. So what else what are your goals? What are your fears and worries? Because that could be really helpful to be able to share more information with you from that healthcare perspective. And the big one that I've often seen is people being afraid of pain. So also from a healthcare perspective, if that fear is being in a lot of pain, we know how to adjust that healthcare plan to make sure that we can stay on top of pain, because it is manageable depending on the situation, but it's something we can work with. So it's really important to write down what some of those fears and worries are about the future. So there can be a discussion around that. What are your strengths and priorities? Again, going back to how you want to live. Who is that choice of person that you would like to speak for you? So if you've got that representation agreement or you have something different, it's good to have that written down. How much am I willing to go through for more time? That's a big one. That was usually my go-to when I was working directly with people. I'd start off with asking people, do they value having more time, or do they value having that quality of time? And then asking specifically, what does that look like? And how much are they then willing to go through to meet those particular goals, whether it's quantity of life or quality of life. And I can't imagine living without. That is another really big statement, because it really gets down into that nitty-gritty values pieces, and really shows this is something that's big within my life, right? And we can create care plans that are around those pieces. So one tool you can use to start writing things down is the My Voice booklet, which is a provincial booklet that was put out by the Ministry of Health, the BC Ministry of Health. So they do have some pages in the back there that you can start writing out some of your wishes. There's a representation agreement layout for you to fill out. They've got a temporary substitute decision maker list that you can fill out in the back there, and an advance directive. So it is a hefty book, I do have to warn you. There's a lot of pages. It's not some light bedtime reading. But it is there as an option for you guys if you did want to go through it. But really, you can write on anything, whether you want to type it out on your computer in a Word document. If you have a notebook, napkin, some people write poetry. You could do a audio recording. Some people videotape it. When we say record, I know the default is often writing things down, but if there's other ways that you want to record something, then that is totally acceptable as well, as long as it can be shared with others. So this was that one form that I just mentioned, the temporary substitute decision maker list, that is in the My Voice booklet. It can be really helpful. I have this filled out personally for my own green sleeve, which you can see the little green image in the corner there, the green sleeve that you can receive in Fraser Health. We can send that out to you guys if you do not have one for yourself. And that's just a magnetized little pocket thing, and that you can start sticking your information in. The temporary substitute decision maker list just kind of walks you through that list I went through earlier. So you can start writing down names. If you've got a certain family dynamic with that individual, you can write out details in the margins. It's really helpful from the healthcare perspective if, say, you've got a couple children that you've written down, but maybe there's one that you haven't talked to in a long time, and you don't want them to necessarily contact that person. Doesn't matter what the reason is. you can write that little note inside saying like, please don't contact this person. That's okay. It helps guide us when we do have to go through that temporary substitute decision maker list if you are in hospital. And so all of that can go into the green sleeve. Anything else, Lauren, you want to say about that?
Just that green sleeves can be ordered from us through Fraser Health. There is no cost to them. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a 1-800 number and an email address there. You can reach out to us and we can mail one out to you at home. The My Voice is available for download on the Ministry of Health website. Just a simple Google, you'll find it quite easily. Or if you need a paper copy, we can also mail those out.
Okay, great, thank you. And yeah, so here are a couple of different medical order forms, which would also be good to have a copy in your green sleeve. The one on the right-hand side is the Fraser Health version, so the medical order for scope of treatment, which would be filled out by your physician. And hopefully there's a conversation that happens between you and your physician before it is filled out. And they tick or they sign a particular section that kind of guides healthcare providers when you first come into hospital. It can be changed at any time. It's not set in stone, but that's there for you. The document on the left is a no CPR form that is a provincial one that is also recognized by the paramedics. This one, I believe, is it $60, Lauren, per year?
Yeah, if you have a provincial do not resuscitate, there's a club that you can join, and there's a $60 fee. And what comes with that fee is that you could actually order a necklace or a bracelet that has do not resuscitate stamped on it, if that's something you feel strongly about and that you've discussed with your doctor and that you would like to have.
Yeah, and that's an option there because most of us don't go walking around with our green sleeves in our purses or in our pockets or our wallets. So the bracelet is there that can be used. So if something happens when you are in the community and paramedics come to assist you, then they'll be able to see that bracelet there for you.
Laura, there was also the question in the case that you arrive at the emergency room and your advance directive or even your representation agreement, how would care providers know where that is or know what that is, where that is?
Well, all healthcare providers should know what they are, but that is often one of the first things we do ask is if that person has any of those documents on hand. We first start looking for someone who we can communicate with and then asking that person if those documents are available and having those brought in so that we can see them.
I see. Okay, thank you.
It would be best, we actually advise everybody to keep, if you have an advance directive, if you have a do not resuscitate form, anything like that, the central location for all of that is in your green sleeve. So that when paramedics enter your home, we ask that you keep the green sleeve on your refrigerator. They can go right to the fridge, open up that vinyl envelope and find all that paperwork right there. Because unfortunately our province is not connected in a, like a computer database or anything like that where all those documents could be stored. That would be ideal. If any of you want to lobby the government for that, we would love you for it, but that doesn't exist right now. And so the green sleeve is really that connection between you and the healthcare system for those documents.
What about on someone's phone? Are people using their phones to hold that kind of information?
Yeah, the problem with storing on the phones, though, is it's not a legal document. So if you took a photograph of a legal document, we wouldn't be able to honor it, right? We need to see original copies with signatures and things like that. So, but the iPhone is a great place to write down any wishes or values, beliefs, preferences, that kind of stuff. Because under the law, those are seen as expressed wishes and we can honor that.
So the app on the phone for the emergency contacts, those would not be, those are not legal emergency contacts. Like they're not my designated people.
We'd still have to double check it against the hierarchy list and check in with everybody and see if that's accurate still. Yeah. But
Thank
that
you.
emergency contact area, yeah, you can do that. So, and it goes the same for any other places that we store our information. If you have a tattoo that says DNR, we can't honor it because it's not a legal document. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Lauren, I think Liz has a question. And then do you mind just switching the slide forward just for our contact information?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Once again, the green sleeves can be received from us in Fraser Health. So here's the contact information. You can reach out to us and ask for order a green sleeve and have it mailed to your home. And then we have a question.
So go ahead,
right?
Liz.
Hi, and I'm coming to you from the U.S. actually. So thank you to Shauna. Shauna's seen me and invited me, but I've shared this with Shauna, and something I just thought of. I know video has some kind of QR, but I decided, well, why not have a QR that links to linked documents so that you don't have to have physical paper necessarily, but you can scan it all in. So I went ahead and I put a QR on the back of my phone. And then it's also on my watch face, on, an iWatch face. So if I'm found basically without any paperwork, that EMTs will hopefully scan it just like they scan menus nowadays and see all my information. At the very least, they can return my cell phone.
Yeah, these are all practices that I hope come into the real world and come into play, right? Because we have the technology to do it. Unfortunately, in our healthcare system and in the Canadian healthcare system, we lack a few dollars for getting some of these things in action and in play throughout our systems. It would be awesome to have something.
But they're free. That's my big thing, is like a QR code is free. Google Docs are free. YouTube videos are free. So you could even link to yourself doing a selfie video of your advanced directives that links to a QR code. I have it linked to a web page that I keep updated that has everything in there, including my funeral plan. So
yeah, and I think this is definitely an area where healthcare needs to start teaming up with legislators, because the legal community and the healthcare community really could be coming together to work on things like this and really improving a lot of systemic barriers for a lot of us and making sure that our legislation reflects what people need. Yeah.
But thank you all.
So Laura and I are pretty much done with our blah, blah, blah at you all, and we're just gonna stay on the line here. I don't know if people have things to do or places to be. It's already 11:33, but we're gonna hang out here on the line for a few more minutes. And if anybody has any questions, concerns, any comments at all, we're happy to answer.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank both Lauren and Laura for providing us with all this information, and their expertise is super relevant information. And to remind everyone that we've recorded this session, it will be on Peace Arch Hospice Society YouTube channel in case you would like to share it with other family members. And if you need to go, then jump off. Otherwise, I'll hang out with Laura and Lauren until they're ready to go as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Most informative.
Thank you very much. That was a great help. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Really, really enjoyed it.